Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today. I know most of you have to, but I still thank you. I'm sure you're ready for the first break of today so that you can go get your mid-morning coffee fix. But before, I'd like to take you on a journey with me about a phenomenon that has characterized my everyday life for over 5 years now, that being anxiety. I call it a phenomenon because in philosophy, the word is defined as being an object of a person's perception and experience. And although I've done a lot of research, both primary, secondary, as well as using my own experiences, I'm well aware that everyone experiences anxiety differently and may not agree with what I have to say today, but I invite you all to open your minds today and to redefine with me. So I'd just like to give you a bit of background into where I come from. I'm a born and bred Joburg girl. I'm lucky enough to have a solid family structure where I've always been loved and supported unconditionally. I was diagnosed with anxiety 5 years ago. It was something I found extremely difficult to accept and to even talk about. I was extremely angry because I didn't understand there was nothing wrong in my life, and I almost felt ungrateful for having this when there were so many people suffering in the world. So I never would have pictured standing up here today admitting to you that I have anxiety, let alone talking about it in front of all of you. And that's actually where I realized that there's such a huge problem with that, because there are so many people in this world that are and were in the exact same position I was in, and they are not or were not talking about anxiety and actually accepting that they have it. So this is where my redefinition began. A statement became very apparent to me while doing some research, and it's something I actually want to make very clear here today. Is that anxiety is for everybody and anybody. It doesn't matter what your life is like or where you have come from. So when I was diagnosed, I was sent to see the psychologist. Every time I went to her, she would tell me how bad anxiety was. She would tell me I needed to see her every week, if not twice a week. And every time I went back to her, she would look at me with these eyes and she would say, "How are you doing today, Kate? I know it's bad, but we're going to try fix it." She ended up telling me that anxiety was something bad to have so many times that I ended up repeating it in my head. And every time I started to feel a panic attack, anxiousness, or sadness coming on, I would automatically think, wow, this is bad. So anyway, I ended up going on to all the medication that she told me to, and a year and a half into this, I started to feel funny again. And I was actually too scared to go back to the same psychologist because I actually couldn't face being told that anxiety was bad again. So I changed tactics completely. I went to see a homeopath who never asked me how I was feeling. She never forced me to talk, and she never once told me that anxiety was bad to have. She focused on realigning my energy, and if I wanted to talk to her, she was there to listen to me. Looking back on it all now, I know I needed the medicine and that psychologist at the time, but what I didn't need to hear was that anxiety was something bad, because if it's something that I'm going to live with for the rest of my life, it is not something that is going to be defined as a negative hindrance in my life. So when searching the word anxiety online, a number of articles come up, all titled along the lines of 15 steps to stop your worrying, how to cope with anxiety, 10 ways. There aren't many, if any, articles that explain anxiety properly, how to accept it, and how to actually use it to your advantage. So this got me thinking, if when I was diagnosed, if there was more research at the time, or if the psychologist I was sent to didn't have such a negative outlook on my situation, would things have been different? I have now had anxiety for 5 years, and yes, some days are better than others, but I've never actually been better. And I watch some of my friends that have anxiety too, some sitting in this class, and they have never been better either, despite the supposed negative hindrance we all have. So to begin my Mac Live journey, as most of you did, I had to do some research. So I decided to look into the medical research behind anxiety and see how this has possibly shaped our experience and understanding of anxiety. I found that 1 in every 6 South Africans suffers from a mental health disorder, that being anxiety, substance abuse, or depression. 1 in 13 people around the world suffer from anxiety alone. And 3.83% of the world's population have anxiety. Anxiety is the most prevalent mental health disorder in the world. These numbers are overwhelmingly large. The American Psychological Association defined anxiety as being an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. When I first read this definition, I actually laughed out loud. Because to me, anxiety is so much more than this definition says it to be. I mean, increased blood pressure. What does that even mean? APA go even further to define anxiety as either being a normal echo of the original fight or flight response, and that they title normal anxiety. And then there's anxiety disorder, which they say define as occurring when a reaction is out of proportion to what might normally be expected. But my question is, what is normal? Society has conditioned us to act within these set social boundaries that if you happen to stray from them, it's automatically assumed that you must not be normal. So despite all the research into anxiety, and when I say there is tons of it, there is tons of it. If you find yourself or a friend or family member with anxiety, there's still a large negative perception, misunderstanding, fear, and even denial when it comes to it. I, for one, have experienced this firsthand. My question, why is this the case? For any of you sitting here today that has anxiety and you're able to relate to me, or if you don't have anxiety and you're sitting there thinking having anxiety sounds awful, you're right. It is awful. It is something difficult to live with. But it isn't something to shy away from and prevent you from achieving your dreams, because it doesn't have to only be a negative consequence in your life. And this is where my redefinition began. By redefining anxiety to move to a greater understanding of how it can affect one's life in both negative and positive aspects, will in turn show that it is not something to fear, and it doesn't have to be a complete hindrance in a school, in a friend, or in the workplace. A lot of people tend to think that people with anxiety can't handle a lot, can't handle stressful situations, but I believe it is the exact opposite. Anxiety is not only a negative hindrance in your life, it is a motivation. It is a motivation to feel more prepared when faced with challenges. A recent research study showed that students in schools that have anxiety actually ended up having an improved performance on test scores and while participating in sports compared to people that don't have anxiety. It is an increased motivation to work for what you want because you're so afraid of failure and letting other people down that you have an increased performance rate. So instead of completing a task and looking over it once, it is found that a person with anxiety will look over it an average of 4 or more times until they believe it is of perfect standard. Anxiety is also a positive character trait in friendship. It is said that a person with anxiety may be more empathetic and understanding to other people's situations due to their own struggles. It is also found that a person with anxiety is more concerned with how they interact with other people. It is also said that the anxious tend to consider multiple outcomes from their overthinking. So they may be more prepared when it comes to decision making and problem solving. I mean, who ever would have thought that your overthinking would become a great decision making tool? A recent research study conducted by Professor William Lee found that people with anxiety are less likely to have a fatal accident due to the processes that anxiety triggers in your brain. And this is what I'm going to tell my parents next time I get a speeding fine. Except now they're sitting here, they'll know I'm lying. An even more recent research study conducted by a French research team found that people with anxiety tend to signal danger or threat in a different region of their brain compared to the more laid-back individual. This also proved that people with anxiety tend to signal this threat or danger and act quicker than someone that doesn't have anxiety. But more importantly, anxiety is overcoming a challenge every single day, whether it be getting out of bed in the morning or completing a task you thought you'd fail at, or both. And I believe that is pretty fantastic to say that every single day you have overcome a new challenge. It might not be new, but you have overcome a challenge every single day. It is a pathway to becoming a stronger version of yourself, even though it may not feel like it in the moment. Russell Brand, actually funny enough, summarizes anxiety into 3 key syllables. He says, anxiety is fear, and fear is energy. Fear is awareness, and most of all, fear is wisdom. And through anxiety and fear comes with it a sense of truth. And through this truth, you are able to carry this energy, this awareness, and this wisdom with you into your everyday life. So in short, suffering from anxiety may seem like a huge negative, but it doesn't have to be. It can be redefined in a positive way to show people that it is not something to prevent you from achieving your dreams. It can be used as a life tool to achieve those dreams. Companies looking to employ a candidate may actually shy away from employing someone with anxiety. I believe that is very wrong, because if they employ someone with anxiety, they'll be sure that that person will complete tasks to perfection. They will show 100% commitment, even though there may be a few panic-stricken moments along the way. I have learned to view my anxiety as a positive, and therefore see it as anxiety redefined. And I truly believe that if when people are diagnosed with anxiety, they are told about all the positives that they can achieve on top of these negatives, it will help anxiety be not seen as such a negative and something to pull you back, but rather something that will pull you forward and make you stronger at the end of the day. Thank you.